The human body is not designed for war. It is a fragile system of bone, blood, and nerve, calibrated for a world of finite stress. Its breaking points are well documented, its limits known. Sustained terror fractures the mind. A single piece of metal, traveling faster than sound, can end everything. Exhaustion, fallout, cold, disease, these are the silent killers that have felled more armies than bullets. War is a relentless audit of human endurance, and the ledger is always written in red. Most men break. Many are broken. And then, there are the outliers, the statistical anomalies, the men who stand in the storm and, against every law of probability, are not swept away out. This is not a story about a general who directed armies from a map room far behind the lines. This is the story of the man who stood in front of those lines. A man who presented himself for the audit, time and again out. And each time the examiners walked away, shaking their heads, the ledger balanced not with his life, but with his relentless, impossible will to keep it. This is the story of a soldier who was issued a rifle in 1941 and who, out, through the most murderous campaigns of the Second World War, never surrendered it. He was there when the world caught fire in the Pacific. He was there when the gates of Fortress Europa were kicked in, loud. He was there in the frozen hell of the Ardennes and the final, brutal push into the heart of the Reich. His name was Charlie O'Brien, a private first class and later a staff sergeant in the United States Army. He was not a character from a propaganda poster. He was 5'8", 145 pounds, with a quiet demeanor that bordered on shy. He came from a wheat farm in Nebraska, where the only sounds were the wind and the distant whistle of a train. He had no particular hatred for the enemy, no burning ideology that fueled him. What he had was something far more powerful, and far more mysterious, an ungodly talent for survival. He was the man who walked through the hail. The one who, when the shell landed, was in the one crater it didn't create. The other soldiers began to watch, not for inspiration, but for a clue. If they could stick close to Charlie, maybe, just maybe, some of that strange, quiet luck would rub off. His war did not begin on a famous beach under a hail of machine gunfire. It began in the green, suffocating heat of a jungle that seemed to breathe malice. The Philippines, 1942. After the devastating blows at Pearl Harbor and Clark Field, American and Filipino forces were executing a desperate fighting retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. Charlie, then a fresh replacement in the 31st Infantry Regiment, found himself not in a heroic last stand, but in a slow, grinding nightmare of decay. This was a battle fought not just against Japanese infantry, but against the environment itself. Dengue fever, malaria, and dysentery whittled down companies faster than snipers. Rations were cut, then cut again. Men boiled leather straps for soup. Ammunition was doled out by the bullet. In this world of slow dissolution, Charlie's first lesson in survival was learned meticulousness. While others grew sloppy with fatigue, he cleaned his M1 Garand with a religious fervor, knowing a jammed rifle in the jungle was a death sentence. He purified his canteen water long after others gave up, boiling it over tiny, smokeless fires. He learned to move not just quietly, but slowly, becoming a part of the jungle's rhythm. His eyes constantly scanning not for men, but for the unnatural line, the wrong shade of green. His first true brush with death came not in a firefight, but on a scouting patrol. His squad was moving single file along a muddy trail when the point man tripped a wire. Not a crude explosive, but a sophisticated Japanese trap, a wooden box containing a hornet's nest, agitated and then released. A cloud of furious insects erupted. Men screamed, swatting wildly, stumbling blindly. In the panic, two ran directly into a pre-sighted machine gun nest that opened up moments later. Charlie, however, had frozen. Instinctively, he had dropped into the mud and remained perfectly still, covering his face with his netting. The hornets, seeking movement and heat, largely ignored the cold, motionless shape in the muck. He listened to the screams of his friends, the chatter of the Nambo gun, and learned his second lesson in chaos. Sometimes the only action that saves you is a perfect, conscious inaction. He waited until long after the sounds had faded, then crawled backward, inch by terrible inch, away from the trail. He returned to his lines alone, coated in mud and guilt, but alive. The fall of Bataan and the ensuing death march should have been the end of his story. The sheer, industrialized brutality of it, the beatings, the bayonettings, the utter deprivation, was designed to kill. Men died for stumbling. They died for trying to drink from a ditch. They died simply because a guard was bored. Charlie marched. He became a ghost in a column of the dying. He learned to catch rain in his mouth, to scoop the undigested rice from the feces of the man in front of him. He saw men shot for helping a fallen comrade, and he learned the most terrible lesson of all: to look away, to make his heart small and hard, to save his empathy for a time when it wouldn't get him killed. It was here that the myth of Charlie O'Brien began. Among the prisoners in the squalor of Camp O'Donnell, whispers passed between skeletal men. That Nebraska kid is still standing. O'Brien made it through another descenary wave. He wasn't leading escapes or organizing resistance. He was just persisting. He survived the camp not through rebellion, but through a profound, animal understanding of the ecosystem of starvation. He could identify edible weeds the others overlooked. He could fashion a hook from wire and catch the tiny, darting fish in the camp's drainage ditches under the guards' noses. He was a librarian of scarcity, cataloging every possible source of a calorie. When a work detail was announced for a remote airfield on Mindanao, most prisoners dreaded it. Charlie volunteered. It was a calculation. The work would be brutal, but it was away from the concentrated death of the main camp. On the island of Mindanao, fate offered him a fleeting chance. A typhoon raged for 3 days, washing out roads and scattering guards. In the confusion, Charlie and 2 others slipped into the jungle. For 47 days, they evaded capture. Charlie led them, using skills forged in Bataan. He found water and vines, built shelters that were invisible from 10 feet away, and steered them away from trails and villages. One of the men, weakened by beriberi, simply lay down one morning and didn't get up. The other was recaptured trying to steal a chicken from a farm. Charlie, watching from the tree line, saw the flash of the rifled butt, heard the shout. He melted back into the green. Alone again, he was recaptured not by force, but by betrayal. A Filipino family, terrified of the Japanese reprisals for harboring an American, turned him in. He was beaten, but not killed. They sent him not back to O'Donnell, but to the docks. He was crammed into the hold of a rusting freighter, a hell ship, bound for Japan. The journey was a new circle of hell. Darkness, suffocating heat, the stench of vomit and death, the sounds of men going mad. Allied submarines prowled these seas, unaware of the human cargo below decks. When the torpedo struck, it was a cataclysm of screaming metal and inrushing water. The ship listed violently. Japanese guards scrambled, sealing the hatches on the holds before abandoning ship. Charlie was trapped in a sinking iron coffin with hundreds of other men. In the pitch black, with cold, oily water swirling around his knees, then his waist, he found a piece of broken pipe. With a strength born of pure desperation, he hammered at the hinge of a small auxiliary hatch, a coal chute out, that others had dismissed as immovable. It gave way on the 10th blow. A sliver of gray, stormy light appeared. He squeezed through, cutting his shoulders and back on the torn metal, and plunged into the churning, fuel oil covered sea as the ship groaned and sank beneath him. He floated for a day and a night, clinging to a piece of debris, surrounded by the cries of the dying that slowly faded into silence. He was fished out, semi-conscious and coated in black oil, by a Japanese minesweeper. To his captors, he was no longer just a prisoner out. He was a ghost, a bad omen returned from the deep. They put him to work in a copper mine near Osaka out, where survival was measured in centimeters of tunnel dug and grams of millet received. The air was thick with dust that coated the lungs. Cave-ins were common. Here, Charlie's luck seemed mundane, administrative. He was assigned to a timbering crew, shoring up tunnels, rather than the more dangerous face of the dig. It was a job that kept him, more often than not, in slightly safer, reinforced sections. He endured 2 years of this. The beatings, the cold, the gnawing endless hunger. He saw the atomic flash over Hiroshima from the mountains, a silent terrifying pulse of light on the horizon. He didn't know what it was. He thought it was some new, horrible weapon being tested. When the guards suddenly disappeared a few days later, and American planes buzzed the camp dropping canisters of food, he didn't cheer. He walked slowly to the dropped supplies, picked up a bar of chocolate, and sat down against the mine entrance. He ate it slowly, methodically, staring at the valley below. The war in the Pacific was over. Charles O'Brien, private first class, had survived. He was shipped home, a walking skeleton weighing 97 pounds. The Army gave him a medical discharge, back pay out, and a train ticket to Nebraska. The farm was just as he remembered it, but he was not. The quiet was no longer peaceful. It was deafening. The vastness of the sky felt exposing, not freeing. He tried to work the land, but his hands, damaged by years of labor, shook. The nightmares were relentless, not of battle, but of the hornets, the sealed hatch, the oily water. In 1947, he was working in a hardware store in Lincoln when a former officer, a captain from the 31st recognized him. "My God, O'Brien," the man said, gripping his hand. "They told us you were dead." Twice. The captain was now a recruiter for the Army Reserve. The country was demobilizing, forgetting. But the Army remembered men who could endure. They offered him a clean slate, a steady paycheck and a purpose that the farm no longer could. With a quiet desperation, Charlie O'Brien re-enlisted. The Army, recognizing his experience, promoted him to sergeant and made him an instructor at Fort Benning. He was to train recruits in survival, escape, and evasion. He was a terrible lecturer, halting and uncomfortable in front of a group. But in the field, he was a revelation. He could show a city kid how to find water in a dry creek bed, how to build a fire in the rain, how to move across open ground without being seen. He taught the lessons of Bataan and Mindanao not as war stories, but as simple, factual procedures. The students listened, captivated. There was an aura about him, a stillness that suggested he knew things they could never learn from a manual. In the summer of 1950, the orders came down. The instructor job was over. The United States was committing forces to a place called Korea. Sergeant O'Brien's file, Lout, with its unique notations of survival in extreme deprivation and experience in asymmetric warfare, was flagged. He was assigned as a platoon sergeant to the 1st Battalion, 5th Marine Regiment. He was going back to war. Out. The landscape that greeted Charlie O'Brien in the late summer of 1950 was one of shocking, brutal contrast. Out. After the claustrophobic jungles and prison mines, Korea presented a world of stark, sun-baked hills, endless rice paddies, and jagged mountain spines. The heat was dry and punishing. The war was a confused, chaotic mess, a rapid advance, a desperate retreat, a bloody stalemate already beginning to form along the Naktong River perimeter. To the fresh-faced Marines arriving at Pusan, it was a terrifying new reality. To Charlie, it was a familiar, if dreadful, pattern: a collapsing front, unreliable supply lines, and a determined enemy holding the high ground. He was 28 years old but felt 100. As the platoon sergeant for 2nd Platoon, Baker Company, his job was not to be a hero, but to be the anchor. The young lieutenant in command, a recent college graduate named Peters, had the maps and the radios. Charlie had the instinct. His first action was not an assault, but a night defense of a nameless hill overlooking a crucial road. The North Korean People's Army hit them just before dawn with a human wave attack, bugles blaring. A tactic straight out of a different era. The Marines dug in on the reverse slope as Charlie had insisted. Cut them down with disciplined, interlocking fields of fire. In the lull after the attack, Lieutenant Peters was exhilarated, praising the men. Charlie walked the line silently, checking ammunition counts out. Repositioning a machine gun to cover a blind spot, noticing the nervous tremor in a young rifleman's hands. He sat next to the boy, a kid from Chicago named Riley. He didn't give a pep talk out. He simply pointed to the dead NKPA soldiers littering the hillside. "See how they're all bunched up," Charlie said, his voice a low rasp. "They followed the bugle. Don't you ever follow nothin' but your orders and your own two eyes out. You stick to your hole, you fire at what you can see, and you let the other guys worry about their sector. That's how you live through this." It was practical, unglamorous advice. It was also the distilled essence of his survival. The pendulum of the war swung violently. After holding at Pusan, General MacArthur's audacious landing at Incheon cut the NKPA in half, and the UN forces surged north in a spectacular, triumphant advance. For Charlie's platoon, the advance was a grueling series of village clearances and hurried marches out. The enemy melting away before them. The men grew confident, almost cavalier. They joked about being in Pyongyang by Thanksgiving, home by Christmas. Charlie alone remained grimly quiet out. He'd seen this before, the long, overextended supply lines, the unfamiliar terrain out, the underestimation of an enemy who could fade into the population. He enforced field discipline with a quiet relentlessness out. He made men dig proper foxholes even when they stopped for a few hours. He checked the purity of their water. He confiscated shiny trinkets or non-regulation scarves that could catch the light. The men grumbled, calling him Hard Luck O'Brien behind his back, believing he was trying to impose the misery of his last war on this new, victorious one. Their advance halted at the Chongchon River. the first Siberian winds of winter sliced through their summer weight uniforms. And then, with the sudden, shocking force of a tidal wave, the Chinese entered the war. They came at night, not with bugles this time, but with a eerie, silent vastness, emerging from the darkness like ghosts, blowing whistles that pierced the freezing air out. The entire front dissolved into a nightmare of encirclement and retreat. Baker Company was ordered to hold a narrow mountain pass to allow other units to withdraw. What followed was the Chosin Reservoir campaign, a name that would become synonymous with unimaginable cold and ferocious combat. The temperature plunged to 30 below zero. Men's feet froze in their boots. Machine guns seized up unless they were kept constantly cleared of lubricant. Medical morphine syrettes had to be carried in the mouth to keep them liquid. In this frozen hell out, Charlie O'Brien came alive. His meticulousness, once mocked, became gospel out. He showed men how to build sleeping hollows in the snow that conserved body heat out, how to warm their rations against their skin before eating to prevent cracked teeth out, how to keep their rifle bolts working with a drop of captured Chinese lamp oil at. During a fierce attack on a hillside dubbed Fox Hill, the Chinese overran a section of the perimeter. In the close, 250,000 of grenades, bayonets, and entrenching tools, the platoon commander was killed out. Charlie took charge without hesitation. He organized a ragged counter-attack, not with a dramatic charge out, but by directing fire teams to cover each other as they leapfrogged from rock to frozen ditch, reclaiming the position yard by bloody yard. He seemed to have a preternatural sense for where the next attack would come out, repositioning men minutes before a new wave hit. It wasn't magic, it was the hard, earned ability to read terrain from an enemy's perspective, a skill learned evading Japanese patrols in Mindanao. One night, a Chinese sniper had the company pinned down out, picking off anyone who moved near a stalled truck. The lieutenant, who had replaced Peters, ordered a squad to flank the position, a near suicidal move across open ground out. Charlie quietly suggested an alternative. He took a single soldier, the nervous kid Riley, and they spent 2 hours crawling out, inch by frozen inch, along a shallow drainage gully no one had noticed. They came up behind the sniper's nest out. Charlie didn't fire. He threw a grenade into the rocky crevice. The explosion was muffled by the snow. The company's path was clear. When they finally fought their way to the port of Hungnam for evacuation out, Charlie's platoon had suffered 60% casualties, but they had brought out all their wounded and their weapons. They had not broken. On the deck of the transport ship, wrapped in a blanket, shivering uncontrollably, Charlie looked back at the receding, snow-covered mountains. He had survived another impossible retreat. Korea ground on for 2 more years of brutal hill fights and trench warfare. Charlie rotated home in late 1952. His body battered by frostbite and dysentery, his mind weary out. He was awarded a Silver Star for Fox Hill and a Bronze Star for valor. But he threw the boxes in a footlocker unopened. The Army, once again, had a use for him. His reputation as a survival expert and a steady, unflappable NCO was now cemented. He spent the next decade as a permanent fixture at the infantry school, a living textbook out. He helped write the new field manuals on winter warfare and counterinsurgency. He trained the officers who would go to a growing advisory role in a place called Vietnam. In 1965, out, as the first American combat battalions waded ashore at Da Nang, Master Sergeant Charles O'Brien received new orders. He was 43 years old, He had survived a death march, a hell ship, a prison mine, the frozen retreat from Chosin out. He had a chest full of medals he never looked at, and a body that ached in every weather, changing joint. The Army offered him a safe, final posting as a senior advisor at the Pentagon. He requested, instead, a transfer to the 1st Cavalry Division. He was going back. One last time. When asked why by a perplexed personnel officer, Charlie simply said, "The boys going over there, they don't know. Somebody's got to show them." Vietnam was a war of a different color, a different sound, a different kind of fear. The oppressive, wet heat of the Central Highlands brought back the sensory memories of Bataan with a vengeance. But this enemy was different. The Viet Cong and the NVA were masters of terrain, of traps, of patience. The war was fought in fleeting, vicious ambushes in booby, trapped villages, in the constant, loud, psychic weight of never knowing who the enemy was. Charlie, as a senior NCO in a reconnaissance platoon, found his skills from the Philippine jungle were more relevant than anything from Korea. He taught men to see the jungle, to notice the bent blade of grass, the quiet bird call, the faintest smell of nuoc mam on the wind. He ran the platoon with a calm, detached precision. He was never angry, never raised his voice. His authority was absolute because it was based on a simple, terrifying premise, loud. He knew more about staying alive than anyone else in the province. His third war became a catalogue of near misses that solidified his legend. On a patrol near the Ah Drang Valley, he stopped the point man mere feet from a perfectly concealed, punji stake pit. Out, he had seen a pattern in the disturbed leaves that didn't match the wind. During a company-sized assault on a suspected VC base camp, his helicopter was hit by ground fire on approach. Out. As it lurched and smoke filled the cabin, Charlie remained seated, calmly checking his gear. The pilot managed a crash landing in a clearing. While others scrambled out in panic, Charlie was the last off, helping the wounded co-pilot. As they formed a defensive perimeter, he pointed out where the tree line was too close on one side, out, forcing them to move the entire position 50 yards just before a mortar barrage landed exactly where they had been. It was as if he could feel the geometry of death. The younger soldiers, out. The 19-year-olds who thought they were immortal until the first firefight, began to see him as a talisman. They didn't call him hard luck anymore. They called him the ghost, or old man time, because it seemed time itself refused to claim him. Out. He survived a year in Vietnam, a full, brutal, bloody year of patrols and firefights and monsoons. His rotation was up. On his last day, his platoon threw him a small party with warm beer and canned peaches. They gave him a captured NVA pith helmet signed by everyone. He allowed himself a small, tight smile. The next morning, as he waited for the truck to take him to the airfield, a mortar round, a random, harassing shot, landed in the motor pool 50 yards away. A piece of shrapnel the size of a coin sliced through the canvas of the orderly room and embedded itself in the wall mapped, right in the spot marking their base camp. Charlie, standing outside, didn't even flinch. He just looked at the hole in the canvas, then down at his own intact body, as if confirming something. He got on the truck. He flew out of Tan Son, Nut Air Base, watching the green landscape recede below him. Master Sergeant Charles O'Brien retired from the United States Army 6 months later in 1966. Out. He had served under 3 flags: the sun, bleached flag of the Philippines, the frozen flag of Korea, and the rain-soaked flag of Vietnam. He had survived the Bataan Death March, a hell ship sinking, a Japanese prison mine, the retreat from Chosin, and a year in the Viet Cong's backyard. The army had no more use for him. The world, it seemed, had finally run out of wars for Charles O'Brien to fight. He moved to a small, quiet house outside of Tacoma, Washington, near Fort Lewis, drawn by the familiar rhythm of a military post. He lived alone. He took up gardening, growing tomatoes with the same meticulous care he once applied to his rifle. He volunteered at the local VA hospital, not as a counselor, but in the laundry room, folding sheets in perfect, crisp squares. He never spoke of his experiences unless directly asked by a historian, and then only in clipped out factual sentences devoid of emotion. He was a ghost living in a quiet neighborhood, a library of survival with no one to read him. The nightmares never left, but he had built a life around them, a structure as disciplined as a military routine to contain the chaos within. In 1985, a young historian from the Army War College tracked him down. The historian was researching continuity of experience across America's 20th century wars. In Charles O'Brien, he found the ultimate case study. Over several afternoons, with tape recorder running, he gently probed. He asked about luck. Charlie was silent for a long time, looking out at his tidy rows of tomatoes. Luck, he finally said out, his voice like dry leaves, is what people call it when they don't want to see the work. There's no luck in a foxhole. There's digging. There's no luck in a firefight. There's fire discipline and covered movement. I saw men get lucky. A bullet misses them by an inch, and then the next minute, they stick their head up in the same place because they think they're charmed, and a sniper takes it off. That's not bad luck. That's stupidity. I wasn't lucky. I was careful. I was always careful. He paused again, a longer pause. And I was scared. The whole time. That's the other thing they don't tell you. The fear never goes away. You just learn how to carry it without letting it shake your hands. The historian pressed on, asking about memory, about the weight of carrying so much. Charlie's eyes grew distant, fixed on some point beyond the garden fence. You don't remember it like a story, he murmured. You remember it in pieces. The smell of cordite and damp earth, the taste of iodine tablets in your canteen, the specific sound a .30 caliber machine gun makes when it's firing short bursts, compared to when it's panicking and just hosing ammo. The way frost forms on a wool blanket in Korea, it crackles when you move. You remember the useless things. The face of a Japanese guard who gave you an extra rice ball once for no reason. The name of a Filipino village you passed through in A42, long gone now. The heat coming off the engine of a Huey. It's all fragments, like a broken mirror. You can't see the whole picture anymore, just sharp, glittering pieces that catch the light at odd times. He fell silent, the confession hanging in the air. He had given the historian more than he'd given anyone in 40 years. When the historian left, fallout, he felt he had been in the presence of a geological fact, a mountain that had weathered too many storms to count out. The story of the soldier who survived every major battle was never a headline. It circulated in military journals, in the footnotes of scholarly papers, a curious anecdote of improbable endurance. Charles O'Brien wanted no part of any legend. He attended the occasional reunion, but sat in the back, speaking little. A quiet, nodding presence that the old-timers would point out to their grandchildren with reverence. the one enemy he could not outmaneuver or outsmart, advanced with its usual, relentless pace. His body, which had withstood starvation, freezing, and shrapnel, began to yield to the simple burdens of age. The old wounds ached with a meteorologist's precision. The hearing in his right ear, damaged long ago by an artillery shell in Korea, faded to a perpetual, high-pitched hum. Still his routine held. The garden, the VA, long silent walks. He had become a curator of his own solitude, and he was, if not at peace, then at a kind of armistice with his past. In the winter of 2004, pneumonia found him. It was a swift, merciless siege on lungs already scarred by mine dust and jungle rot. In the sterile quiet of a hospital room, surrounded not by family, but by the indifferent beep of monitors, Charles O'Brien faced his final objective. There were no bugles, no whistles, no screaming shells, just the slow, difficult work of breathing. A young nurse, checking his vitals, noticed his eyes were open, clear, and focused on the ceiling. She asked if he was in pain. He shook his head slowly, a barely perceptible movement. His hand, thin and lined with prominent blue veins, lay on the white sheet. She saw the faded, blurred tattoos on his knuckles, old service-era inked. She tried to make conversation, to offer some human connection in the clinical gloom. "You've seen a lot, haven't you, Mr. O'Brien?" she said softly, adjusting his oxygen tube. He turned his head slightly, his gaze meeting hers. It was a look of infinite wariness, but also of a profound, unbroken clarity. He didn't speak of wars or battles. He didn't mention the 3 continents, the 5 decades, the countless moments where death had passed him by. He simply looked at her, a young woman at the beginning of her own story of care and struggle, and with a final, gentle effort, he gave her the only piece of wisdom that had ever truly mattered, the core principle that had guided him through the hornet swarms and the frozen hills and the booby-trapped trails. His voice was a dry whisper, a rustle of leaves. "Just pay attention," he said. And then Charlie O'Brien. The soldier who had survived everything the 20th century could throw at a man, closed his eyes, and for the first time in 87 years, he finally stood down. The room was quiet. The monitor's steady pulse flattened into a continuous, unforgiving tone. Outside, the rain fell on Tacoma, washing the streets clean. His story didn't end with a dramatic flourish or a final medal. It ended as it had been lived out. With quietness, with an instruction, with an enduring focus on the immediate task. The myth of the unkillable soldier was just that, a myth. The reality was a man who was afraid, a man who was careful, a man who paid attention. In the end, that was his secret. It was no secret at all. It was the oldest, simplest, and hardest lesson of all. To see the world clearly, to respect its dangers, and to meet it not with bravado, but with a steadfast, unwavering vigilance. He was not a hero because he was fearless. He was a survivor because he never, not for 1 second of his long and terrible century, forgot to be afraid, and then chose to act with care in spite of it. His legacy is not in the battles he fought, but in the simple, monumental fact that he endured them all and returned, again and again, to teach others how to do the same. He left no grand speeches, no famous quotes. He left a garden, He left neatly folded sheets. He left a lesson, whispered to a nurse in a quiet room. Just pay attention. And in that, perhaps, lies the greatest story of survival ever told.